All right. Today we deal with chapter 2. And chapter 2 is titled The Revolutionary Period and the Birth of American Identity. And you see this period starts from 1776, which marks the independence of the United States. And then it moved to the 1800s. It means the 1900s, the 19th century, sorry. Chapter 2 covers the revolutionary period and the birth of American identity. The birth of American identity coincides with, the breakout of the American Revolution. And the American Revolution, or the War for Independence, is started, but that is political. Understand that this war was also materialized in the field of literature. And then you start seeing, the birth of American identity. And the period we cover here dates from 1776, which marks the independence of the United States, and it goes up to the 1800s. And the objectives of this chapter is, number one, to learn how political and philosophical writing contributed to the formation of national identity. It's very simple here. What we call political writing, what we call philosophical writing, remember that the chance of America is that its politicians, the former politicians, were philosophers. They were philosophers and politicians. So they mingled political and philosophical thinking. And this also was reflected in the literature. That's why in the objectives, it's important to understand how political and philosophical writing contributed to the formation of national identity. The national identities that Americans show today, the national identities that they demonstrate, is born or was born from the philosophical and political writings. And it is a contribution of these intellectuals who made America. The next one is to recognize the values of reason, democracy in the founding text. There are some canonical texts, okay? There are some, foundational texts. And we can also talk about simply the founding fathers. Here you need to recognize the value of reason. These are values that Americans appreciate. Reason, liberty, democracy. They are present, very apparent in the founding texts of American writers. Next, to highlight the emergence of an American voice in revolutionary literature. We talked about the American Revolution. Understand that literature also was used as an arm, as a weapon. Literature also played a role in the revolution. That's why in terms of objectives, it is important to mention or to emphasize the emergence of African-American voice in the revolutionary literature. The African-American voice represents the Black literature, Black American literature, Black American writers, Black American activists, because we do not only talk about Native Americans, white Americans, but also Black people contributed a lot to the development of American literature. Now, Roman 1, section 1. From colonies to a nation of ideas, the influence of political writing. Here, the title tells you how America began as a union of colonies to a nation of ideas. It is a union of colonies that became a nation called America. And we talk also about the influence of political writing. I told you about political writing, how philosophers and political thinkers influence America. So the American Revolutionary period from 1775 to 1783 marks a crucial transformation in the nation's literary history. When you talk about American literature, you will see that the revolutionary period, it means the period when America had its revolution. It means the war for independence. America wanted to become free from Britain. So this period marks a crucial transformation in the nation's literary history. It's not only political, but it's also literary, because political writing played a role in literature. It was a time when writing became an act of nation building. I repeat again, in the field of literature, when you analyze the revolutionary period of America, okay, or the American Revolution, in the domain of literature, it was a period when writing became an act of nation building. To simplify it, writing was used to build a new nation, to reclaim identity, to reclaim a national identity, to reclaim a national sovereignty, to reclaim a political sovereignty. So before independence, colonial literature had focused mainly on religion and survival. Yes, what we discovered last time in chapter 1, this literature focused a lot during the colonial time, okay, before independence. The focus was religion. When you revisit Puritan literature, and survival also. Even Puritans, they talked about survival because they navigated the ocean. They crossed, they went to America, the Atlantic Ocean. So this voyage was not easy. Some talked about survival. Survival in life also, because they wanted to be safe and to go and, practice God, and they survived. But also in colonial literature, colonialists, they were in a kind of exploration. The journey also was difficult for them. People like John Smith, they recounted that many people died, but they were able to survive. So, before independence, colonial literature had focused mainly on religion and survival. And now it means after independence, it turned towards politics. All right? Or it moved to another dimension, dealing with politics, literature that deals with politics, reason, and the search for liberty. The search for liberty is very important because Americans at that time wanted only their freedom and their independence. So America's writers began to see themselves not just as colonialists, but as thinkers shaping a new identity. So, as I told you in the first semester about the function and the role of literature, here literature was used by the colonialists not only as a way of thinking and giving philosophy, but also a strategy to shape a new identity. So literature was a means of cultural affirmation, a means of expression. Literature was used as a means of expression, cultural affirmation, the shaping of a new identity. Is it okay, class? Are you with me? Is it clear? Can I move, class? Can you post in the chat? Let me know if it is clear, I move. Just post it in the chat if it is okay. All right. Okay, so the printed word became a weapon. So it means literature was a means of struggle. Literature was a means of expression. It was a weapon in armor. Okay? A weapon for freedom. And literature became the instrument through which people discuss rights, government, and morality. So literature was a means of expression. Literature was a means of cultural expression. Literature was a means of social and political expression. So Americans used literature to discuss things like rights, human rights, democracy, government, and morality. So at the heart of this intellectual awakening means éveil in French, you find people like Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, etc. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson. These people are founding fathers. They are among the founding fathers of America. C'est les pères fondateurs. They are the founding fathers. And they were mostly engaged in political writing. So these writers, among whom Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, they used language to define what it meant to become American. Americans, like the founding fathers, class understand who are the founding fathers. The founding fathers are those who were politically engaged and also literally to give birth to the American nation, those who built the nation. Among them, great philosophers and political thinkers and political writers, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson. This group of writers, they used language to define what it meant to be an American. So Americans started seeing their identity through literature. Their national identity was in literature. The words of these philosophers help transform rebellion into revolution and philosophy into public life. So their personal rebellion, their political rebellion, okay, was translated into a revolution, and it influenced the American Revolution. Their philosophy, okay, their intellectual, character also influenced Americans, and they transform it into public life. So finally, you see that the political writers largely dominated, and they influenced, American life. In fact, the Enlightenment, I told you about the Enlightenment in the first semester. Enlightenment, in French, it means le siècle des Lumières. The Enlightenment. In 17th and 18th century European movement. Enlightenment was a European movement of the 17th and 18th century. It focused or it insisted on reason, science, and human progress. The siècle des Lumières. It focused on reason, science, and human progress. It marked Europe. And this European movement strongly influenced this period of American, history. So it means that the European Enlightenment influenced American philosophers and political writers. So American writers borrowed the beliefs that truth could be discovered through logic rather than divine revelation. So it means the Enlightenment, the siècle des Lumières from Europe, influenced American writers. So American writers borrowed this philosophy and they applied these values. Yet, they also adapted these ideas to the American context with a young and hopeful society. So they adapted the values of the Enlightenment to their context. So because they were a young nation, a young society that values or believed in great intellectual values like hard work, personal freedom, and equality. That's why you hear Americans say time is money. They believe in hard work. You see Americans in their currency, the bill, the dollar bill, le billet du dollar. Qu'est-ce qu'on a écrit? In God we trust. In God we trust. Hard work, personal freedom, and equality. So Benjamin Franklin's writing, especially his autobiography and his Poor Richard's Almanac, are full of entertaining sayings and practical advice that celebrate these values. So Benjamin Franklin was a founding father, un père fondateur, a political writer and thinker. Benjamin Franklin's writings influenced many Americans. He wrote his autobiography, the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. Go and read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. It's full of modern lessons. It's full of philosophy. It's full of, a lot of human values. Benjamin Franklin also wrote the Poor Richard's Almanac. In his writings, you find sayings. Sayings, it means proverbs, idioms, and these are, until today, influence American way of life. Americans were influenced, many of them were influenced by Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin's use idioms, expressions like sayings, proverbs. These proverbs are still used in American way of life. So the style of Benjamin Franklin was simple and direct. Class, try to go and read Benjamin Franklin. You will see that his writings are accessible, admirable. Benjamin Franklin had a very simple, and his style was direct. And it was written in the language of everyday man, so in an ordinary language. But it was rich, and it helped spread his ideas beyond intellectual circles to common readers. The simplicity of his style helped him reach a large number of readers. Benjamin Franklin influenced many Americans. When you read his autobiography or his Poor Richard's Almanac, you find a lot of lessons of life, a lot of philosophy, a lot of moral lessons. So Benjamin Franklin's pen, the Enlightenment became through Benjamin Franklin's pen. So it means in his writing, the Enlightenment became American pragmatic and optimistic philosophy. And it focused on moral and self-improvement. If you read Benjamin Franklin, it tells you how to succeed in life, the good values you have. You find there interesting proverbs that Americans like, and they use it. So in fact, Benjamin Franklin was born in 1706 in the province of Massachusetts Bay. He was a talented person, and he became a scientist, a statesman, writer, and inventor. You see, he was a great man. Benjamin Franklin was a very talented person who became a scientist, a statesman, a writer, and an inventor. That's why you see these people are philosophers. They influenced the life of Americans. What did Benjamin Franklin achieve? Benjamin Franklin began to write the note or the famous Poor Richard's Almanac. The Poor Richard's Almanac was a literary publication. with content both original and borrowed. Why it was borrowed? Because he did not use his real name. He used pseudonyms, what you call in French, pseudonym, not his right name. And that pseudonym was Richard Saunders, on which much of his popular reputation was based. If Benjamin Franklin is or was famous, he had a great reputation. It is thanks to the borrowing and his original production under pseudonyms like Richard Saunders. He did not use his name directly, put in Benjamin Franklin. It's just like in Senegal, there is a writer called Ken Bugul. Her real name is not Ken Bugul, her real name is Maria Tumbai. But when writing, she has used the name of Ken Bugul. It's like Mongo Betty. Mongo Betty is not using his real name. Here also, Benjamin Franklin used a pseudonym, Richard Saunders. So he frequently wrote under pseudonyms. The first issue published was for the upcoming year. It means the next year, 1733. Benjamin Franklin developed a distinct signature style that was pragmatic, and he had a sophisticated but very soft and self-appreciating tone with declarative sentences. So it means the style of Benjamin Franklin was amazing, very sophisticated, and impressive. He was a talented writer. So although it was no secret that he was the author, his Richard Saunders character repeatedly denied it. So it means that even if it was an autobiography, some people say that sometimes there are not similarities. The Richard Saunders does not prove it. So, Poor Richard's Proverbs. You find many proverbs in Poor Richard's. And these proverbs, okay, such as a penny saved is 2 pence dear. Sometimes that's the original, is misquoted. It is transformed. Like a penny saved is a penny earned. If you put it in French, it corresponds to un sou économisé est un sou gagné. So these are proverbs, very famous proverbs that Benjamin Franklin used. And when Americans read them, they learn lessons of life. They learn their philosophy. Another one, fish and visitors think in 3 days. In French, it means l'hôte et le poisson en 3 jours font poison. Or you say poisson et hôte après 3 jours ne sont bons qu'à jeter à la porte. The other one, the early bird catches a worm. L'avenir appartient à ceux qui se lèvent tôt. All these proverbs, Americans found them in the writings of Benjamin Franklin. So they were full of philosophy, moral lessons, and Americans admired Benjamin Franklin as a writer. They loved his writing. They read him a lot. He influenced the life of many Americans, and he changed the life of many Americans. So you see the importance of literature. It's not only for entertainment, for pleasure, but literature has the function of, conveying or expressing or affirming a cultural identity, philosophy, and culture or a way of life. So freedom in folk societies meant the ability to provide an apt proverb for any occasion. Finally, you see, that's why even in today, in folk culture, you see people who practically use it, or readers. When you speak, you use a proverb to illustrate. This in American society was part of the influence of Benjamin Franklin. That's why I say wisdom in Fox society meant the ability to provide a proverb for any occasion, and his readers become well prepared. So in sum, Benjamin Franklin influenced American style, and people adopted many of his thoughts, especially proverbs. You can say, class, let us start now. You know, if you want to succeed the second semester and the first semester, we have to start before the exams. Reading, working hard, because as Benjamin Franklin said, the early bird catches the worm. So you see, people are copying him. People are using his citations, his thought, because it demonstrates a way of life. That's why even in ordinary life, even in Senegal, we have this culture. When you speak and you say, Wolof Njai Nena, and you give a proverb, this is important. So Benjamin Franklin introduced this way of life in American culture, using proverbs, you know, expressing things. Is it okay, class? Are you with me? Can I progress? Is it clear? Any question? So post your questions in the chat. I will be happy to answer them. All right. So this is the influence of Benjamin Franklin using proverbs. The early bird catches the worm, etc., etc. Now, Thomas Paine and the literature of revolution. When we talk about political writing and the literature of revolution, it means the literature of rebellion. Thomas Paine played an important role. Perhaps no writer captured the revolutionary spirit better than Thomas Paine, whose pamphlet Common Sense, 1776, changed the course of American history. That's an affirmation. That's why I say probably, no writer achieved to capture revolutionary spirit better than Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine published an interesting pamphlet, Common Sense. It was a political writer. And Common Sense was published during the American independence, 1776. And it changed the course of American history. Thomas Paine encouraged the Continental Army, the American soldiers, and the colonies to go and fight their independence. He said that it was legitimate for Americans to claim independence from Britain. So written in plain language that ordinary people, simple language that ordinary people could understand, Common Sense argued powerfully for independence from Britain. Yes. Thomas Paine's Common Sense was written in very ordinary language, and it defended the idea of independence. Thomas Paine's Common Sense. If I ask you a question, what was the essence of Thomas Paine's Common Sense? It was a pamphlet, and it encouraged Americans to take their independence legitimately. So it said that British monarchy was absurd and encouraged Americans to build a just and democratic society. So Thomas Paine influenced Americans and encouraged the leaders of the American Revolution to go on, guys, take your independence. It is legitimate. This monarchy is not just. You have to build a just and democratic society. So class, millions and millions read common sense, or they heard it read one day in public places or in churches, which makes it one of the most influential political texts ever written. If the Common Sense by Thomas Paine became very famous, it's because of its reputation. It was read by millions and millions of people who read it by themselves or who heard people read it in public places or in churches. Then it became one of the most influential political texts ever written in American history. So class, you see the contribution of political writing. It is very important. So Thomas Paine followed this success with the American crisis. He also published the American crisis because the American crisis just covers, if you want, the period of the War for Independence. That one was a number of essays. He wrote also a number of essays. And these essays inspired soldiers during the darkest days of the war. Soldiers who were committed or soldiers who were involved in the War for Independence. Thomas Paine also produced essays that encourage these soldiers. So if you see some lines, some examples or extracts from the essays, its famous opening is, "These are the times that try men's souls." It means these are the times that test the souls of men, the courage of men, their bravery, who they are, their fidelity, okay, their patriotism. So this captures the courage and endurance that defines a revolution. The American Revolution was characterized by strong determination, by strong courage, and by strong endurance of its leaders under the influence of George Washington, but also writers like Thomas Paine, okay? They did it kind of to legitimate the fight and the war. So Thomas Paine's work show a major shift in American literature. Yes, it was a good transition in American literature. Why? Because writing was no longer just for educated clergy, religious people, or intellectuals. Literature was the voice of ordinary people to fight for justice. Yes, Thomas Paine contributed a lot because he showed to people that in American literature, writing was not simply just for educated people or religious people or intellectuals, professors. He showed to Americans that literature was a voice of ordinary people fighting for justice. Strategy in the War for Independence to encourage American soldiers to go and legitimately fight for their independence. So Thomas Paine had a confident tone and a logical structure and passionate rhetoric turned prose. It means he used prose with a confident tone and a logical structure and with a lot of persuasion and rhetoric. So this was a tool of persuasion and empowerment. Very rhetorical, very persuasive. And empowerment, it means it builds its strength. It gives more power. And then later on, you see that thinkers or writers, including Thomas Jefferson, would draw on the same philosophy and vision of Thomas Paine of liberty and universal right. It means Thomas Jefferson and others adopted the same philosophy and the same vision of liberty and universal right. So Thomas Paine also represented the link between literature and action, as his words did not just reflect history, they help make it. You see? So Thomas Paine, in his use of literature, as I told you in the first semester, what is literature? What is the importance of literature? Look at how Thomas Paine influenced and changed the life of many Americans with literature. Class, literature is not only a way of dreaming. Literature, look at for Thomas Paine, he used literature. He represented the link between literature and action. And his words did not only reflect history, his words help make history. Is it okay for Thomas Paine? You understand now what Thomas Paine did? Can you class post and tell me what Thomas Paine wrote to influence American people? Can you post in the chat and tell me what Thomas Paine did or what Thomas Paine wrote to influence American people? Or you tell me how Thomas Paine used literature to influence American people. I take 1 minute. Can you post, class, in the chat or comment on? Go on, feel free. Yes, Muhammadu Mbai, they were all inspiring Thomas Paine's vision of life. All right. Those who are in the Zoom. Now, we move to Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Thomas Jefferson, very important class. You need to know who was Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson and the Declaration of Independence. Yes, good. So another great figure of this period, Thomas Jefferson, wrote one of the most famous documents in world history. That was the Declaration of Independence. I told you why. The Declaration of Independence is a result of political production, political writing. It is also studied in the domain of literature. Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. And as I told you, the Declaration of Independence is the political birth certificate of America. You are the students. We can ask you, what is your student ID card? You show it. What is your national ID card? You show it as Senegalese. What is your birth certificate? You show your birth certificate. Declaration of Independence is called also the political birth certificate of America because it is a text that gave America its sovereignty. And Thomas Jefferson is the one who wrote the Declaration of Independence. That's why it is assumed that he wrote one of the most famous documents in history. So, though political in purpose, yes, it means even if, all right, the Declaration of Independence objective was political, it remains one of the finest examples of literary expression in English language. Yes, the Declaration of Independence was essentially political. In its objective, it was political. But in the field of literature, it remains one of the finest examples of literary expression in the English language. Jefferson's opening line, I quote, "We hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal." These beautiful lines that open the Declaration of Independence, they combine reason, rhythm, and emotion to express both the logic and poetry of freedom. If you read this sentence, we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Here, America wanted to rebel, to show its frustration to Britain, and to use a language of poetry and beauty to romanticize their political problem and to romanticize their political claims. It means to make it beautiful, to give it a literary shape and expression. And whoever reads the Declaration of Independence saying, we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Nous prenons ces vérités comme évidentes, que tous les hommes naissent libres et égaux. That's what Benjamin Franklin showed in the Declaration of Independence. And these powerful words, they combine rhythm and emotion. The document's elegant balance of moral conviction and persuasive arguments demonstrate how literary skill and political vision can coexist. So if you read the Declaration of Independence, you see the philosophy, the beauty of the text, the content, the political action, the civic action, and the writing, the style. You see a combination of literature and politics. That's why you say, when you read the style of Thomas Jefferson, you understand how literary skill and political vision can coexist. So literature also is a means of action. Literature is a means of action. Literature is a weapon. La littérature est un moyen de combat. Take Negro African literature, what Aimé Césaire did. Oh, it was fantastic. Questions, class? Yes, Omar C. And they did good comments. Yeah, very good. Yes, this shows that you understand. Okay, so in the Declaration of Independence, now you see how Thomas Jefferson influenced American way of thinking, how he encouraged, how he combined literature and political vision. It's not only Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine. There are other political writers and philosophers who contributed. And next to Jefferson, next to Thomas Paine, you have Alexander Hamilton and John Jay. And remember that Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States. He was number 3. And here you have James Madison. James Madison was president number 4. So next to Thomas Paine, next to Thomas Jefferson, you have other examples like Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, who together wrote the Federalist Papers. You see, the Federalist Papers, these are essays but political writing. So Thomas Jefferson helped shape the intellectual foundation of the new republic. That's what Thomas Jefferson did. Americans appreciate the founding fathers, those who built the nation. So the essays of Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, titled the Federalist Papers. These was political essays. And these essays explained and defended the principles of the US Constitution. So they defended the principles of the US Constitution, and you find it in the Federalist Papers. And they turned political theory into clear, persuasive writing, accessible to ordinary citizens. Maybe today you are students of literature. If you read things about law or political science, you may be lost. But with the writings of Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, they tried to simplify and to turn political theory into very simple, very clear, and very persuasive writings that was accessible to every ordinary person. They simplified the theory of political theory. They made it accessible to all ordinary people. Whoever reads understands. So everybody got interested in literature because for them, literature simplified political thoughts, and then it was interesting for every American. Are you with me, class? Can I continue? Is it okay so far? Can I continue, class? Do you have questions? You can post them in the chat. You can post them in the chat. Okay, now I move on the second part. I move to the second part, Roman 1. The African American side. African Americans are Black people, understand it. When we talk about American literature, it's not only Native American, white Americans. Understand that there is also what we call Black American literature. Black American, or you call them African Americans. And when we talk about the African American side, it means that at this moment, that was a beginning of the American nation, but also Black people was there. They was there as enslaved people. So you have on the African American side, Phyllis Whitley and Olaudah Equiano, the early African American voice. When we talk about African American voice, Black American literature, if you want, in other words, you will talk about two icons, two literary icons and figures, Phyllis Whitley, who was a woman, and Olaudah Equiano. They all came from Africa. I will explain to you. While white male leaders dominated the political stage, the revolutionary era also saw the rise of a remarkable African American voice. Yes. Here, class, what you need to understand is that even if American literature was dominated by influential religious and white leaders, male leaders, men mostly, there was also the presence of a remarkable African American voice. They were not very well known because they were not free, they were slaves or enslaved. So Phyllis Whitley was a slave deported from the Senegambia. Imagine Phyllis Whitley was deported here. You all maybe have visited Gore, the Gore Island. What was Gore representing? Or what did Gore represent in the past? It was a site where a slave taken from the sub-region, they came here in Dakar and people now send them to Europe. So Phyllis Whitley was a slave, a woman, deported from Senegambia. And she was the first published Black poetess. Phyllis Whitley is or was the first. She was deported from the Gambia. She was brought to Boston as an enslaved child. I told you this. What is the difference between enslaved and enslaved? Class, avoid to call them slave, call them enslaved. Slave means in French esclave. Un enslaved person, c'est une personne qui est mise à l'esclavage. Ils ne l'ont pas choisi. On leur a forcé l'esclavage. Okay, very interesting, Muhammadu Mbai. Does the Declaration of Independence fight for blacks? I would say no. I would say no. It's very political. At that time, Americans wanted their independence, the political independence. It was only understand, Americans say that we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. All men, yes. If you read all men, you think that it is all men. There is a paradox, a contradiction in the Declaration of Independence. The independence they were talking about did not include slaves. You know what is a big contradiction? The big paradox is Thomas Jefferson himself, as a great man, I appreciate him. The paradox was that Thomas Jefferson was a slave owner. It means he had a plantation, he had slaves. Muhammad Ubaid, you understand? That's the problem of this citation. We hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Nous tenons ces vérités pour évidentes que tous les hommes naissent libres et égaux. So who are the men? Are black people men? That's the problem. Jefferson, who wrote this, had slaves. And the paradox was that many American presidents had slaves, even George Washington. And you will see that Phyllis Whitley has criticized that. All right, so Phyllis Whitley was brought to Boston as an enslaved child, and she published her book, Poems on Various and Moral, in 1773. You see this concerned with the Boston Massacre. You see, they existed, but they were ignored. They suffered from obscurity because Americans did not want to show the celebrity of black people because these people were under domination. They were enslaved. So Phyllis Whitley's poetry praised Christian virtue, moral discipline, and liberty. These are values that echo the revolution's ideal but expose its contradiction. Yes, you see, values. I told you, what does it mean? What Phyllis Whitley showed, she expressed a lot of values about racial dignity, about freedom. These values echoed the revolution's idea, but it exposes contradiction. Because when the Declaration of Independence says that we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal, who are the men? It's both black and white. But for Americans, their independence, this independence did not include or concern black people. So that's why you see Phyllis Whitley wrote poem to Excellency George Washington. Phyllis Whitley, as a woman and a slave woman, she wrote letters to George Washington. Read letters to George Washington, to His Excellency George Washington. What did she say? Her letters celebrated George Washington's leadership, while indirectly asserting the right of all people, including African Americans, to freedom. Because when Americans say in their Declaration of Independence, we hold this truth to be self-evident that all men are created equal. They need independence. The independence should be for everyone. And when she wrote letters, Phyllis Whitley wrote letters to George Washington, indirectly, she celebrated George Washington. She congratulated George Washington, but she criticized, saying to George Washington, the independence you want, we also want it. Black people want it. So this was a way of criticizing injustice in America through a black female voice. That's why, class, Phyllis Whitley is a legend, a strong black woman, a slave woman, an enslaved woman who criticized and who defended the cause of black people. What is significant in the story of Phyllis Whitley is that her life and work remind us that American literature was diverse even from its beginning. Yes, at the very beginning, you see that what made America famous, Black people contributed, but they were ignored because it was a time they did not have their freedom, but they fought for their freedom. So though she wrote in a neoclassical style influenced by European poets, her themes of equality and moral worth introduced an early challenge to slavery and racial prejudice. So she was influenced by European poets, but she used a strong and eloquent and persuasive style that introduced an early challenge to slavery. Yes, she criticized the practice of slavery. She criticized the leaders of America like George Washington, what they mean by independence. I hope it's okay for you about Phyllis Whitley. You know who is Phyllis Whitley? If I ask you a question, where is Phyllis Whitley from? She is from the Gambia, the Senegambia. She was taken from the Senegambia and she was brought to America, first to Boston, to become a slave. She grew there, she learned English, she learned Latin and Greek, and she became a great writer. Her poetry was sophisticated. It denounced injustice, and it showed a Black voice in American. It expressed a Black female voice in American literature. So like Whitley, Olaudah Equiano was an enslaved man and writer deported from Nigeria. You know, in Nigeria, you hear people talk about Biafra. Olaudah Equiano also was a Nigerian taken from Nigeria, from Iseke, Biafra. And he was brought to America to become the property to his white masters. He was enslaved. Now the history of a man now, Olaudah Equiano. So despite the difficult journey he experienced, he became a writer and he retraced his hard journey as a Black person. So the voyage from Africa, the deportation from Africa to America was a very hard journey. People call it the Middle Passage. And Olaudah Equiano materialized this journey in his autobiography. He published an autobiography titled The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustave Vassa the African, in 1789. So Equiano's autobiography is a foundational text in American literature, particularly the slave narrative genre. Yes, Olaudah Equiano is a pioneer, c'est le pionnier des récits d'esclaves. C'est lui qui a, le précurseur, c'est lui qui a produit le premier récit d'esclaves aux États-Unis. It is Olaudah Equiano. So his text, his autobiography, here is a title, The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Olaudah Equiano, or Gustave Vassa the African, published in 1789. Is a foundational text in American literature, particularly the slave narrative. Why is it a foundational text? Because it is the precursor. He is the one who published the first slave narrative genre. So America is the slave narrative genre. C'est le premier genre littéraire. C'est le récit d'esclaves. So published in 1789, the autobiography was influential in the abolitionist movement. Yes. When the abolitionist movement started, they read the writings of a slave like Equiano, and they found there the expression of emotion and frustration and rebellion. They found their criticism. So Equiano's account in French récit of the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage is the hard experience of a slave to be taken from Africa to Europe. This difficult journey is called the Middle Passage. The deportation, the fact that they have been taken maybe from Gore or wherever, deported from Africa to Europe, this is called the Middle Passage. So Equiano is a pioneer of the slave narrative. C'est le pionnier. Slave narrative means récit d'esclave. So his work is considered the first influential slave autobiography and established many conventions for the genre, such as the author's claim of authorship, testimonials, and documentary evidence. So the autobiography or the slave narrative that Equiano produced marked the beginning of African American literature, and it contributed to revolutionary literature in US. So Middle Passage and his enslavement in America before he eventually purchased his freedom and became an abolitionist. So you will see later on, he purchased his freedom. It means he paid. He gave some money. He paid a lot of money to become free. So his story explores themes of identity as he navigates claiming his African, British, and American identity and reflects on the experience of identity fluidity. So you will see that Equiano, you find Equiano in African literature. You find Equiano in British literature, English literature. You find Equiano in American literature. It's just like a triangle. And if you see the triangle, it looks like the, what you call commerce triangulaire. Africa, Europe, America. Because Equiano was deported from Africa and he was brought to Europe and he was moved to America. Africa, Europe, America. If you draw it, you will have the figure of a triangle. Remember in French, the slave trade, okay? La traite négrière. It was also called le commerce triangulaire. And if you want to visit the metaphor of this triangle, take the case, the Middle Passage of Equiano. He was deported from Africa, he was brought to Europe, and then to America. That's why you will find Olaudah Equiano in British literature, in African literature, and in American literature. Is it okay, class? Are you with me? Do you have questions? If I ask you a question, what is a slave narrative? What does a slave narrative express as a genre? What does a slave narrative express as a genre? The slave narrative tells the experience of enslaved people who were brought to Europe or America. It denounces justice. It also is a call for liberty, freedom. It denounces the institution of slavery in America or in Europe. Douglass and the Black Cause for Freedom. Now, who is Frederick Douglass? African American writers like Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs. Harriet Jacobs also is a woman. They built upon the legacy of pioneers Equiano and Whitley, using personal sufferings into powerful expressions of hope and resistance. The generation of Equiano and Phyllis Whitley is the 18th century. Now in the 19th century, 19e siècle, you have great African-American voices, great African-American writers. And the champion of the 19th century African American literature is Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was like Harriet Jacobs. They were slaves. So in the sense that the slave narrative was introduced by Equiano, they also produced a slave narrative. But the slave narrative became more famous in the 19th century with the contribution of Frederick Douglass. Douglass gave the slave narrative a more powerful voice because Douglass used the influence of the pioneers. All right? Frederick Douglass, as an African-American, an enslaved person, champions the 19th century African-American literature. Yes. As he published his seminal, it means very important work, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. This is an autobiography, a slave narrative by Frederick Douglass, and understands that Frederick Douglass, his work was revolutionary and challenging. It denounced profoundly the institution of slavery. Frederick Douglass criticized harshly slavery, and Douglass used his autobiography. He flew from the Baltimore. He left the Baltimore. He ran away, and he went to New York in the North to join the Association of Anti-Slavery. He joined the abolitionist movement. Frederick Douglass became a very famous, a hero. Douglass received acclaim, and his work influenced many abolitionists to fight against the American racist system of slavery. Douglass also acted as an abolitionist and joined the abolitionist movement until he became free. Douglass started fighting when he was a slave. Douglass was in the Baltimore. Okay, go on, Muhammadu Mbai. Yes, go on, Mbai. What is your question, Mbai? Go on. Yes, Mbai, go on. What is your question? All right. So, Douglass, many critics regarded Douglass not only as a writer, but as a prophet. Yes, many writers, many scholars do not only consider Douglass as a writer, but also a prophet. Douglass did a lot of things. He was a prophet thanks to his genius and his talent and commitment to fight harshly against injustice. Douglass was engaged in his writing, and he served both politically and literally. In the field of literature, he wrote his autobiography, his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass in 1845. And Douglass also was born in 1818 in the Maryland. And in clear and forceful language, Douglass describes his brutal expressions, learning to read in secrets, being whipped by overseers, and finally daring to escape. He suffered a lot when he was a slave. And he tells his story as a slave in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. And Douglass was born in the South, in the Baltimore. And Douglass ran away. He went to the North in New York, because in the South of America, there were plantations. To go to the North to reach freedom. The North was synonymous with freedom. The South was synonymous with suffering. And Frederick Douglass was a great writer. Douglass wrote also My Bondage and My Freedom, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. Why do people celebrate Frederick Douglass class? Because understand that Douglass started like this, okay? I should show you what people call in French, parcours d'un combattant. Douglass started as a slave, and then Douglass grew as an orator. He started to be an orator, a lecturer. He joined the abolitionist movement in the North. He ran away. Okay? He was not born Frederick Douglass. His real name was Frederick Bailey Washington. His real name was Frederick Bailey Washington. Okay? This is a real name of Frederick Douglass. But the problem was, if you are a slave and you don't change your name, people can capture you. They can catch you and bring you back. When he ran from the South, from the Baltimore, he went to New York. He changed his name now, not from Frederick Bailey Washington. People told him, if you are here in the abolitionist movement, if you get out or you write, you expose yourself, people will see your name and they get you back to freedom. And he changed his name from Frederick Bailey Washington to Frederick Douglass. He used now Frederick Douglass because he did not want people to know he is a slave. And when he published his book, he became a great, great writer. So he moved from a slave, he became an orator. He joined the abolitionist movement. He started talking about slavery, denouncing. And then later you will see Douglass became an editor. All right? Douglass became an orator, and then he became a writer. After a writer, he became an editor. And after an editor, he became free. When slavery was abolished, Douglass was employed by America, and he became ambassador. Imagine, Frederick Douglass now was free, and he became ambassador of the United States in Haiti. So he became ambassador of the United States in Haiti. So Douglass was a great man. That's why when I say Douglass was a warrior, a fighter, in French, that's what we call il a fait le parcours d'un combattant. Slave, orator, writer, editor, and then freedom came, Douglass became ambassador. Douglass was abolitionist. I forgot to put abolitionist. And even he was an advisor. Some people said that he was an advisor to President Abraham Lincoln. So you see the experience of Douglass. Douglass did great, great, great things in the fight against injustice. So Douglass' role in the abolitionist movement was to denounce freedom, to tell African Americans, to tell Americans that you have to stop freedom. You have to stop slavery. It's not good. Your constitution says that all men are born equal. We are not equal. Who are the men who are equal? So we need our independence. So America has got its independence. So Frederick Douglass influenced many, many people. So his writing until today are celebrated. That's why you see that Douglass is an icon, a great figure. So America, you see that Douglass' speeches, what to the slave is the 4th of July. In this writing, this is a speech. Try to read it. What to a slave is the 4th of July. One day, Douglass went to New York. It was July the 4th, and Americans were celebrating their independence. And he said, "Is this your Independence Day?" They say, "Yes." He said, "No. This is the independence of America. We slaves are not free." So what is July the 4th for a slave? July the 4th is your independence. It's not our independence. We are not free. If America wants to become a big nation, a big democracy, it has failed. You don't respect the right of people. He has criticized a lot. And he challenged them, telling them, this is your independence. but not the independence of a slave. You say in your Constitution, in your Declaration of Independence, that we hold this truth to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, but we are not equal, we are not free. So you see what Douglas used to influence abolitionist movement. Douglas fought against it. And that's why until today, he has influenced many generations of freedom fighters and many generations of African Americans. Okay? This is what I have to what I had to tell you in this chapter. I have finished my lecture. I hope it was okay for you all. If you have questions, you can post your questions in the chat. If you don't have, this is the end of the lecture. Thank you for your attention. And thank you very much. Is there any question? I hope it was helpful for you all. So this is the end of the lecture. So good luck and see you tomorrow. We will be seeing tomorrow also for African literature. So thank you for coming, class, and have a good day. Thank you and bye-bye.